Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So over the last 6 months, one of the things that I've especially enjoyed with the podcast is having been exposed to new technologies or concepts by many of the excellent guests that I've been able to have on. I found it really interesting to see how things like printed organs or augmented reality or even deepfakes act as generally disruptive factors, but also will have a large impact on the nature of work and jobs overall. So today we'll be looking at another trend that hasn't been brought up on the podcast before, and this is smart cities. So I think that this is an especially important subject because by 2050, UN estimations picture our planet with about 75% of all citizens worldwide living in cities. So typically, when thinking about smart cities, notions of Internet of Things, big data, resource efficiency, sustainability, and general overall efficiency pop into one's mind, and not necessarily jobs and the future of work. However, in today's episode, I'm going to try and make the case that the opposite actually holds true, particularly when looking at what lies beyond smart cities. But for those that aren't yet fully aware of what this trend is, let's start off by looking at what a smart city is. So one of the best ways to think of a smart city is that it is the infusion of technology into every aspect of a city's operations. So this includes some of the more obvious or well-known aspects like transportation or e-governance, but also the perhaps less obvious things like waste management, power supply, and even water management. So one of the key technologies that enables this is, of course, the Internet of Things. By placing cameras, sensors, vision systems, etc., in key parts of a city's infrastructure, a city's resources can be more efficiently allocated. Citizens can be informed of opportunities to better live their lives, and a city can function more harmoniously overall. So I think to make this a little bit more tangible, let's actually look at Singapore, which is often referred to as one of the world's leading smart cities. So Singapore, as an island city-state, is challenged with a high population density, limited geographical area, and an aging population, as well as other factors, which really led it to adopt aggressive solutions decades ago. And part of this was the implementation of a smart city strategy. So, for example, due to population density, vehicle congestion is a real problem. And this led to the adoption of networks of sensors, cameras, and GPS devices embedded into taxi cabs, which has allowed for traffic to be tracked, predicting future congestion, and then informing all drivers of alternative routes. So surveillance cameras look out for road incidents as well, and vehicle recovery crews are actually automatically activated, leading tow trucks and other kind of emergency services to arrive within 15 minutes and clear up most incidents, or at least try to be within that 15-minute time frame. Additionally, smart live electronic devices display the real-time speed of vehicles and alerts drivers if they are violating the speed limit. So moving away from transportation and mobility issues, due to the aging population, wearable technologies such as fitness trackers, smartwatches, and even smart clothing have been heavily promoted. And recorded data from these sensors, as well as sensors in the houses of the elderly, and for patients suffering from different kind of chronic diseases, are sent securely online to healthcare providers, which allows them to monitor the individuals, receive alerts, and respond to any emergencies faster than usual. And as Singapore is an island nation, natural resources are also very limited. So because of this, there's actually something called a utility usage message. And these are sent out to citizens, which allows for people to monitor their own home consumption and foresee overall usage statistics and, of course, the associated bills, which would let people maybe even throttle down the amount of energy or water that they're using. So smart sensors are also embedded inside of office buildings and many household appliances, such as lights, which can be automatically turned off when nobody is at home or in the office building. And in 2015, smart waste bins were introduced as part of a smart waste management program. So there are sensors that are attached to a bin's lid, and these collect information on the contents and location of the bin. And this is notified to a garbage team through a central server. This helps the waste collection team to optimize their route planning and at the same time constantly keeps the public spaces clean. So there are several other examples of how technologies are being used to make the city more resource efficient, livable, and connected. But I think that this should give a pretty decent introduction to the idea of a smart city. So though Singapore is often at the top of the list, there are a number of cities that have similar aspirations and have actually already have numerous running applications. So cities like New York, London, Barcelona, Oslo, and Tokyo are just a few of the top names out there. I think that the implementation of this trend is growing every year and is creating tremendous cost and resource savings across the world. In fact, there was a 2017 white paper by ABI Research estimated that smart cities could lead to cost savings of some $5 trillion by 2022. However, one can take the perspective that this is actually more of a large-scale retrofit campaign of inefficient locations across the world. So what would it look like if a more ambitious ground-up operation were to take place? So over the last few years, there have been some news articles about building entirely new advanced cities. You may have heard of, in 2017, Bill Gates buying 24,000 acres of land for $80 million for a possible Belmont city outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Or Toyota's 175-acre hydrogen-powered test city, Woven, at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan, where construction actually already started earlier this year. Then there is also Neom, the most ambitious city proposed by Saudi Arabia's crown prince, covering over 25,000 square kilometers and costing an estimated $500 billion. So though being built in different countries, at different stages of construction or planning, and facing different issues and delays, these cities are being built from the ground up, having one significant thing in common. They will implement the latest smart city technologies to automate most services and jobs performed in traditional cities today. So for example, in the initial section of Neom, this is the first city section called The Line, the planned 1 million inhabitant, 170 kilometer city plans to exclude traditional forms of transportation altogether. This means no streets and no cars. Instead, a pedestrian-focused perspective will connect community hubs via automated train services. So walkability will define the life of The Line, with all essential daily services such as schools, medical clinics, leisure facilities, as well as green spaces being within a 5-minute walk. This is from the initial press release of The Line, which came out earlier this year. So moving back to Woven City, this city will actually include various autonomous vehicles, but its homes will include robots to assist with daily living. Another interesting fact for Neom, though, was that in the initial press release, it claimed that there would be actually most likely to be more robots than actual human citizens in the city itself. And of course, finally, smart street lighting, waste and energy management, and healthcare will also be connected through a citywide network managed by artificial intelligence. I think that this is really where we see the next step in smart cities, right? The birth of something called the cognitive city. With the implementation of AI into the city's management system, the city can steadily learn how to become more efficient, more sustainable, and more resilient over time. This can be done through constant analysis of the interaction between residents, automated systems, and the city overall through the plethora of sensors gathering data on all of these kinds of interactions. I think it's needless to say, the bulk of city jobs today that offer employment opportunities for the lower skilled segments of the population will not be available in the cities of the future. So in Barcelona alone, where I live, the city has some 5,000 street cleaning and rubbish removal employees. Not to mention all the bus and taxi drivers, last mile delivery workers, etc. There's an argument to really be made about, of course, the lowered preference of working these jobs compared to the more highly skilled jobs of a data analyst or remote operations monitor, which will, of course, be in much greater demand in these cognitive cities. But I think it is much more likely that the sheer number of higher skilled jobs will not make up for the difference in the jobs that are lost. So this can be a serious issue for large segments of urban populations that find their source of income to simply be non-existent in the cognitive cities of the future, and of course might lead to greater degrees of inequality where only certain groups of people can afford to live in these cities. And I think this is even further compounded when we take into consideration the megatrend that was discussed at the beginning, where some 75% of all people on the planet will be living in cities in the next 30 years or so. So hopefully this transition occurs over enough time to allow the training and upskilling programs within cities to make citizens relevant for these new cities. But finally, I think that there's an even greater issue that is really not very apparent when discussing these future cities. So apart from the large price tag associated with either retrofitting traditional cities or building new ones from the ground up, there's a very serious issue that is often drowned out by the noise surrounding gains in efficiency, safety, and improvement in lifestyle. And this really has to do with who is pushing the smart city and cognitive city vision. So in his book, Against the Smart City, Adam Greenfield points to IBM, Cisco Systems, and Siemens AG as the three big corporations pushing municipal solutions under the smart city umbrella. As he writes, when Siemens talks about a city's autonomous systems acting on perfect knowledge of residents, behavior, and habits, what they are suggesting in the first place is that everything those residents ever do, whether in public or in spaces and settings formerly thought of as private, can be sensed accurately, raised to the network without loss, and submitted to the consideration of some system capable of interpreting it appropriately. So the information platforms projected to undergird smart cities are to be privately owned. No open source or free software here. The smart city is a place where the technical platforms on which everyday life is built are privately owned and monetized, and information is reserved exclusively for the use of those willing and able to pay for it. As Greenfield notes in one chapter, the whole model is based on a neoliberal sensibility in which government is stripped down to its most minimal functionality, primarily policing and systems administration, while as much as possible of the surrounding society is privately owned. This means that what most people might actually do with each other and for each other is to the greatest extent possible monetized and commodified to be packaged and sold to the residents, now considered clients, of the new towns. So as I've mentioned or referenced before on the podcast, if you have not seen The Social Dilemma yet, I highly recommend you to see that documentary. It doesn't talk about smart cities, but it does talk about the social networks, the social platforms that we're all using, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., where one of the central ideas, one of the central arguments is that the users, us who are using those platforms, are not seen as users anymore. We are seen as the product. But there is, of course, one central difference between a social media platform and a smart city. You actually live in a city. So therefore, the assumption that human life should be subjected to a standard of technical efficiency is really the root of the problem. Additionally, the data infringement issues of companies like Facebook, which has been coming to the forefront through scandals like Cambridge Analytica, have really made people think twice about using a simple online platform. But I think moving forward, I think that the question that people should really ask as we move into these ever smarter cities is if the risks outweigh the potential benefits of living in a city that has the same potential issues of Facebook and other social media apps, especially when leaving a city isn't as simple as uninstalling an app. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.